Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Recent Reads. You can always tell when I film these first thing in the morning because I look very old, with bags under my eyes, like I haven't just rested for 7 hours. Setting that aside, I have quite a few books to talk about. Seven books to talk about, and most of these I read via audiobook because I have been trying to get back into audiobook and doing a lot more cross-stitching because the current project that I'm working on, I really want to finish. It's been 2 years that I've been working on it. So without further ado, let's get into the books. So I'm going to start with The Memory of Souls, which is book 3 in the Course of Dragon series. I talked about this a little bit last week because I was about 40 to 60% through. I can't remember how much, about halfway. I love this story. I am constantly astounded at how Jen Lyons is able to keep everything straight and write it in there in a very confusing manner that I love and am obsessed with. I love the way that she characterizes all of these characters and the way that the story feels like it's going off the rails, but I know that she's doing it purposefully. I can't tell many details because obviously this is book 3 in a 5-book series, but again, another 5-star. Next we come to a book that I read physically, obviously, because it is a graphic novel, Parachute Kids by Betty C. Tang. I read this last Sunday, actually, and this is phenomenal. The way that Tang writes this, it is so realistic and visceral that you know that she has to be writing from lived experience, and she is. She was a parachute kid. And in this story, so if you look here, full family, parents, 3 kids. So they come over to visit, and that's what the kids think it is. But then after a week or so that they've been there, they sit everybody down, and Dad says, "You guys are staying. I've got to go back to work, and you guys are going to be going to school here." I mean, just, okay, wow, that's a lot. They're from Taiwan, by the way. I should have mentioned that. And then a few more weeks later, after Dad has gone back, Mom sits them down and goes, "I wasn't able to extend my visa beyond the 30 days. I have to go back too." They're all underage. And they have friends there looking after them. But now the kids are basically on their own. The older sister is a junior, brother is a freshman, and then I guess you could call her the main character, she's 10 years old. And this is the story of what happens to them when they're left basically on their own. And there's something that happens where older sister picks up the phone and it's a person claiming to be from immigration. And as soon as they started talking, I'm like, oh no, this is a scam. And she fell for it. And I felt so bad for her and so angry at those people who do that sort of thing and prey on vulnerable people like this. But there's just so many things that happen in this story. It is so well done in here. And there's things that go on with the older brother that I wish were explained a little bit more, but he wasn't the main character, so it didn't get dealt with as in depth as I would have liked. But overall, this was a 4.5-star read. Next we come to another audiobook, and that is House of the Red Fish. This is the 3rd book that I've read out of this 4-book series. I don't think it's actually 3rd in the order, but I don't know where it falls in the order because these are mainly companions. I think I did this book a disservice because I started reading it, and then there was a readathon with Jade from JD Reads where I picked this up, a big book that I read via audiobook, and then I came back to this. However, I did think this was, again, a solid book. Not something that I was necessarily drawn to, but it looked at an aspect of World War II history that I haven't really looked at before, and that is the experience of Japanese Americans living in Hawaii after World War II. because most of those people were not sent to internment camps like the Japanese on the West Coast, because there were so few people that lived in Hawaii at the time that they needed workers. And if they had packed them all up and sent them off, that the economy would not have done as well. But there's still prejudice against them. And obviously that's where the attacks happened themselves. So that was something really interesting to look at. The plot itself was nothing major or significant. It just more was like character study. And so it was very slow moving, and I definitely appreciated it. I think I ended up rating this 4 stars. Next we come to another, what should I say, a very quick read. And this is a book that actually helped me finish a series. This is the second companion-ish in a series. The first book is A Tale of Two Castles. This is the author of Ella Enchanted. And I really like the approach that Gail Carson Levine takes to fairy tales, especially in A Tale of Two Castles. I read that a while ago, so I don't remember the details of it. But basically this girl goes off. She's sent off because her parents can't afford to have her stay home. They send her with a little bit of money to do an apprenticeship, but that sort of thing doesn't exist anymore, and then she's robbed of her money. And she ends up working for a dragon, who will not reveal whether they are a boy dragon or a girl dragon. And everyone is obsessed with this. And I'm like, it's a dragon. Why do you need to care about the gender? The dragon is kind of like a detective. I don't remember what went on beyond what I've said in the first book, but in this one, it lost a lot of the uniqueness that the first book had, and it fell into a lot of fairy tale tropes. That spark of uniqueness kind of kept me at arm's length a little bit from the book, but I did eventually get into it a little bit. In this one, she's traveling with the dragon, and they end up somewhere and they're trying to solve a mystery, and there's a bunch of characters that come into it, a different way that they set things up. There's magic involved. If you kept this book on its own, I think it would have stood a lot better than comparing it to the first. Ultimately, though, I ended up rating this 3.5 stars, which means it's not going to stay on my shelf. Next, we come to a book that I was a little bit nervous about because Jade from JD Rereads loves this author. I vibe with a lot of her fantasy taste, but some of the things that I had heard made me a little bit wary. And that is Spellslinger. And this is Sebastian de Castell. And this is the first book in, I think it's called The Way of the Argosy series. And this is my Buzzwordathon book, but I'll talk more about that in my wrap up. I loved it. I loved it. I started listening to it. There were some snarky, sarcastic quips in here. And as soon as some of this stuff started coming, I'm like, yep, I love it. I was so happy and so relieved that I loved this book. This is fantastic. I love the self-deprecating humor, the way that Sebastian de Castell tells this. I cannot wait to read more. I have The Malevolent Seven still to come on my TBR for the month of September. So I'm excited that I have 2 of his books. I have the first book in his other adult series, but I don't remember the name of it at the moment. See, words are not coming to me first thing in the morning. But this is just fantastic. So Kellen, the main character in here, he lives in a world where he's basically considered upper class because of the magic that they have. But they have to spark their bands or their way of performing certain types of magic by the time they turn 16 or they become servants. And there's a servant in his house that you learn is his uncle, his father's brother. And he never really realizes that, oh, this is actually family and this is how they're going to treat me, because he can't really use his magic. And he hasn't sparked any of his bands. He's about to turn 16. And you think that's going to be the driving thing of this whole story. But some things happen at the opening. And then they encounter this character that I love. And I can't remember her name, but she's fantastic. And she starts to challenge the way that they think about certain things, especially Kellen. And then something else happens with something that they think are these evil, evil creatures. and suddenly he can talk to one of them. I love this creature that basically becomes a familiar with him. I love this creature. He's the only one that can hear him talk, and he's so sarcastic and like casually violent, but not really. It's hilarious. I love it. And throughout this story, basically everything that Kellen knows about his world gets completely flipped upside down. And then we end the story and like, I need the rest of the series right now. This was a 4.5-star read. Then we come to the other book that I read physically, and that is Blood and Ink by Joe Pompeo. This is a TBR book, and this was recommended to me because I had put Killers of the Flower Moon on my TBR. I wish that I had enjoyed this even a fraction of how much I enjoyed Killers of the Flower Moon. This is good. This is decently written. It's about this murder, double murder that happened that everybody was obsessed with. A reverend murdered with a woman who was married to somebody else and not him. And everyone is fascinated with this. And during this time, that's when yellow journalism, when the tabloids were really getting going. And that's what Joe Pompeo set out to highlight, to talk about, was the connection between the tabloids and how they sensationalized this story and sparked America's love of true crime. But I think he got too obsessed with what he was discovering in his research about the tabloids, and he lost sight of the case itself. And it sort of went off the rails at various points, and he's including things about other people who are related to the tabloids and other stories that they covered that weren't this. And it was very dense and full of all this information. He's like, look at all this cool stuff that I found. And I'm like, no, focus, dude. Focus on what you're saying your story is supposed to be. And it was decent. And I enjoyed learning more about a case that had kind of fallen into obscurity. But ultimately, this was just fine. And it ended up being a 3.5-star read. And then we finish with my book of the month, book for this month. And that is Other Birds by Sarah Addison Allen. This I actually finished last night, so it's a good thing I'm doing this in the morning because I wouldn't have been able to talk to you about it otherwise. This is a book where it's not fantasy. It's very much literary fiction, but it's got this aspect of not reality, could be reality, where there are ghosts basically involved, but it's not paranormal. It's telling the story of several different people who all live in this condo complex area on this island very near Charleston called Mallow Island. And it's not high stakes plot. It's very low stakes. But yet throughout this summer that this is talking about, so much comes together. You learn the deep, intimate stories of these different people talked about in this book and how they come together as a found family. This is the epitome of a found family. I've said that about others before, but this author, Sarah Addison Allen, does it so well. The way that they come together, and they're all broken in their own ways. They all have their connections. And there are certain connections that I did not expect to be made. And the whole last 15 or so percent is just different reveals, maybe even like 25%. So something will happen in someone's perspective and you will put something together and they won't have to come out and say it. And you're like, oh, wow. Oh, that's so cool. And then it'll be mentioned. It'll mention specifically in the next person's chapter. And it's just so well done and so heartwarming. I loved this. This, because I finished it last night, I have not put it through Callpile, but I would not be surprised if it's a 4.5-star read. I don't know if I loved it enough for 5 stars, but you'll find out during my wrap up whether or not I loved it enough to make it a 5-star. So there you go. There are the 7 books that I somehow managed to read this week. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.